In 1962, a Soviet naval officer named Vasili Arkhipov refused to authorize the launch of a nuclear torpedo. Two of his fellow officers aboard submarine B-59 wanted to fire. Due to Archipov's position as flotilla chief of staff, all three officers had to agree unanimously. One man's refusal to authorize launch likely prevented World War III. But here's what haunts me about this story. Arkhipov isn't widely remembered as the man who saved the world. Most people have never heard his name, and that's because we're absolutely terrible at learning from our mistakes, especially the ones that almost ended everything. Today, I'm going to walk you through the most catastrophic human errors in history. Not the ones you learned about in school, but the split-second decisions, the ignored warnings, and the arrogant assumptions that cost millions of lives, reshaped entire civilizations, and some that nearly deleted humanity from existence. And the pattern you're about to see will genuinely disturb you. Before we dive into specific disasters, you need to understand something crucial about how humans make terrible decisions. There's a pattern, and once you see it, you'll recognize it everywhere, including in decisions being made right now that could define our future. In 1986, engineers at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant ran a safety test. Let me repeat that. They caused the worst nuclear disaster in human history while conducting a safety test. The operators proceeded with the test despite warnings from multiple subordinates about dangerous conditions. The deputy chief engineer, Anatoly Dyatlov, was under pressure to complete the test before a maintenance shutdown. When concerns were raised, they were dismissed. But here's where it gets interesting. Dyatlov wasn't stupid. He wasn't evil. He was experienced, confident, and operating under immense pressure. Sound familiar? This exact psychological cocktail, confidence plus pressure plus dismissing warnings, appears in almost every major human catastrophe we'll discuss today. The explosion released approximately 400 times more radioactive material into the atmosphere than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. In the immediate aftermath, 2 plant workers died in the explosion, and 28 firefighters and personnel died within weeks from acute radiation syndrome. Long-term cancer death estimates vary widely among scientific bodies, from around 4,000 according to UN agencies to much higher estimates. An area of roughly 1,000 square miles became permanently uninhabitable, all because experienced professionals thought they knew better than safety protocols. Now, you might think this is just about nuclear disasters or Soviet-era problems. It's not. This same pattern destroyed the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986. Engineers at Morton Thiokol warned that the O-rings in the solid rocket boosters weren't designed to function properly below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. The launch morning temperature was 36 degrees. Management overruled the engineers. 7 astronauts died 73 seconds after launch, watched live by millions of people, including children across America, who were excited to see teacher Krista McAuliffe go to space. But these aren't even the worst examples, because at least in those cases, some people tried to raise the alarm. What's more terrifying are the mistakes where the warning signs were so obvious, so documented, so loudly screaming for attention that their complete dismissal seems almost impossible to comprehend. Let me take you back to April 14, 1912. The RMS Titanic received multiple ice warnings throughout the day. Sources document between 6 and 7 separate warnings from other ships. The final warning came from the ship Californian around 10:55 p.m. Radio operator Jack Phillips was busy transmitting passenger messages through Cape Race and, using standard telegraphic jargon of the time, told Californian's operator to stop transmitting because the stronger signal was interfering. Shut up, I am busy." The Californian was so close they could see Titanic's lights. Less than 2 hours later, 1,517 people were dead in the freezing Atlantic water. But the mistakes didn't start that night. The Titanic was traveling at nearly full speed, 22.5 knots, through an area where ice had been reported. Captain Edward Smith had 43 years of maritime experience. He'd commanded ships through these waters before. The Titanic's designer, Thomas Andrews, was actually on board. They had reduced the number of lifeboats from what would have been sufficient to only 20 for 2,224 people, largely for aesthetic reasons. More lifeboats would clutter the deck. Here's what makes this devastating. The inquiry after the disaster revealed that if the ship had hit the iceberg head-on, instead of trying to steer around it at the last second, the Titanic would likely have survived. First Officer William Murdoch's instinctive decision to turn the ship resulted in the iceberg scraping along the starboard side, rupturing 5 compartments. The ship was designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. 5 was one too many. This idea that the attempt to avoid catastrophe often creates it shows up repeatedly throughout history. In 1788, the Austrian army experienced one of military history's most bizarre friendly fire incidents near Karansibis in modern-day Romania. According to accounts recorded decades later, a scouting party got into a drunken argument over alcohol. Someone fired a shot. In the chaos and darkness, different units began shooting at each other, each believing they were under attack by the Ottoman Empire. While casualty estimates vary wildly in historical sources, from hundreds to thousands, what's certain is that the Ottomans arrived 2 days later to find the town virtually undefended and easily captured it. Now, let's talk about the mistakes that seem almost impossible. The ones where the math was wrong, the measurements were off, or someone forgot to convert units. Because some of history's most expensive disasters came down to simple arithmetic errors made by highly educated people. In 1999, NASA lost the Mars Climate Orbiter, a $327.6 million spacecraft, because Lockheed Martin engineers used imperial units while NASA's team used metric. The spacecraft approached Mars at entirely the wrong altitude and either burned up in the atmosphere or skipped off it into space. 9 months of space travel, millions of dollars, years of planning ended because someone used pounds instead of newtons, and nobody caught it. But that's nothing compared to what happened in 2010 at the Clean Energy Natural Gas Power Plant in Middletown, Connecticut. Engineers were performing a gas blow to clear debris from pipelines. The procedure involves using high-pressure natural gas to force debris out of pipes. The gas found an ignition source. The explosion was so powerful it was felt 30 miles away. 6 workers died. Dozens more were injured. The entire power plant was destroyed. The investigation revealed something chilling. This exact type of accident had happened before at other facilities. The procedure was known to be dangerous, but the practice continued because it was faster and cheaper than safer alternatives. Time pressure, cost cutting, and ignoring documented risks created tragedy. This brings us to one of the most controversial naval incidents. In 1968, the Soviet submarine K-129 sank in the Pacific Ocean with all 98 crew members aboard. While the official cause remains disputed, based on what we know about submarine operations and the evidence that was later discovered, it's likely that a critical navigation error placed the submarine far from its intended position. If the crew believed they were in deep water when they were actually near the surface and attempted an emergency ballast blow, a procedure to rapidly surface, the violent forces could have cracked the pressure hull. Water floods in. Everyone dies. The Soviets spent months searching in the wrong location because even their own records were incorrect. The Americans eventually found the wreck using acoustic data. Let me tell you about a mistake so profound that historians still debate whether it was the single worst strategic decision in human history. In June 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Russia with a force estimated between 615,000 and 685,000 soldiers, the largest European military force ever assembled to that point. 6 months later, fewer than 100,000 made it back. Some historians estimate as few as 10,000 combat-ready soldiers returned. Napoleon wasn't stupid. He was arguably one of the greatest military tacticians who ever lived. He'd conquered most of Europe, but he made 3 catastrophic miscalculations. First, he believed the campaign would be short, that he could force Russia into a decisive battle and win quickly. Second, he underestimated the Russian strategy of retreating while burning their own cities and crops, leaving nothing for the French army to capture or eat. Third, and most fatally, he didn't adequately plan for winter. The Grande Armée entered Russia in late June, expecting to conclude operations before autumn. When winter arrived, soldiers were still in inadequate uniforms. Temperatures dropped to -40 degrees. Men froze to death while sleeping. Horses, essential for cavalry and supply wagons, died by the thousands. Disease, starvation, and Russian counterattacks decimated what remained. But here's the moment that defines the entire disaster. Napoleon reached Moscow in mid-September 1812, after winning the Battle of Borodino, one of the bloodiest single-day battles in history with an estimated 70,000 casualties. He expected Russian surrender. The Russians set Moscow on fire instead, destroying 3/4 of the city. Napoleon waited in the ruins for over a month. Sources indicate he remained from September 14 until October 19, hoping for a peace treaty that never came. By the time he admitted defeat and ordered retreat, winter had set in. That 5-week delay, that refusal to admit the campaign had failed, that insistence on waiting for an outcome that was never coming, killed hundreds of thousands of soldiers and destroyed French military dominance in Europe forever. Napoleon's empire never recovered. Within 3 years, he was defeated at Waterloo and exiled to St. Helena, where he died. The lesson isn't just about military strategy, it's about sunk cost fallacy, the human inability to walk away from a failing endeavor because we've already invested too much. We see this in businesses that throw money at doomed projects, in relationships that should have ended years ago, and in policies that clearly aren't working but continue because admitting failure feels impossible. Every single disaster I've described has something in common beyond human error. In each case, looking back, the mistake seems obvious. We read these stories and think, how could they not see it? How could they ignore the warnings? How could they be so arrogant? And that's the truly terrifying part, because we're making the same types of mistakes right now, and we won't recognize them as catastrophic until it's too late. In 2008, the global financial system nearly collapsed because banks, rating agencies, and regulators all ignored warning signs about subprime mortgage lending. Multiple economists and analysts predicted the housing bubble would burst. They were dismissed as alarmists. When Lehman Brothers failed in September 2008, it triggered a cascade that destroyed trillions in global wealth. The Great Recession that followed cost millions of people their jobs. Global GDP declined significantly. The pattern: experienced professionals, confident in complex systems, ignoring people who said, this might be dangerous, all driven by short-term incentives. Sound familiar? Or consider the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010. BP engineers noticed troubling pressure test results in the hours before the explosion. Multiple warning signs indicated problems with the cement seal. They proceeded anyway. 11 workers died in the explosion. Nearly 5 million barrels of oil poured into the Gulf of Mexico over 87 days, creating the largest marine oil spill in history. BP eventually paid more than $65 billion in cleanup costs, fines, and settlements. The investigative report revealed that cost-cutting measures, time pressure to complete the well, and a culture of ignoring safety warnings created conditions for disaster. The same pattern. The same human psychological factors that caused Chernobyl, Challenger, and Napoleon's Russian campaign. But here's what keeps me up at night. We're living through potential catastrophes right now that won't be obvious until they happen. Climate scientists have been raising alarms for decades about rising global temperatures. The evidence is overwhelming. The consensus is approximately 97% among actively publishing climate researchers. Yet meaningful action gets delayed by political pressure, economic concerns, and the exact same confident dismissal of warnings that preceded every disaster I've discussed today. We're watching the same pattern unfold in slow motion, except this time, the scale isn't thousands of deaths or billions in financial losses. It's potentially the habitability of large portions of Earth. So what's the point of knowing all this? Is it just to feel horrified by humanity's capacity for catastrophic mistakes? No. The point is recognition. When you see experienced people dismissing warnings, when you see time pressure overriding safety concerns, when you see, we've always done it this way used to justify risky decisions, you're watching the exact conditions that created every disaster I've described today. Vasili Arkhipov, the Soviet officer I mentioned at the beginning, likely helped prevent World War III because he recognized a dangerous pattern. He'd been through a previous submarine crisis. He'd seen what panic and pressure could do to decision-making. So when his fellow officers wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo at American destroyers, believing World War III had already started, he refused authorization. One man, recognizing a dangerous pattern, changed everything. You won't prevent nuclear war or stop global financial collapses, but you will face moments in your career, your relationships, your life, where the pattern appears, where experienced people are confident, where pressure builds, where warnings get dismissed, where admitting you're wrong or changing course feels impossible. That's your moment. That's when you remember that the Titanic received multiple ice warnings, that Chernobyl operators proceeded despite concerns, that Napoleon waited over a month too long in burning Moscow, that every catastrophe in history was preventable if someone had recognized the pattern and been brave enough to say, stop. The mistakes that changed history forever weren't made by stupid people. They were made by smart, experienced, confident people who were absolutely certain they were making the right decision. Don't be that person. If this video changed how you think about decision making, hit that subscribe button. Next video drops in 3 days. You won't want to miss it.